Hello, I'm Rosie Turner for BBC Writersroom, and today we're hosting a live Q&A with Frogstone, who recently wrote and performed in the wonderful BBC4 comedy Bucket. Remember to keep your questions coming in and we'll try and answer as many as possible. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, that's it. My name's Frogstone and I am a writer and performer. I started out just being an actor really and would be writing alone in my room. But then I did quite a bit of live comedy and started writing more shows. And I had a few, pilots get, commissioned as scripts, and I wrote on some radio shows, and I wrote a feature script, entered into competitions, and eventually something got made. And from there, we had Bucket. So, yeah, that's me.
So what was the inspiration behind Bucket then?
Okay, so Bucket had a two-prong inspiration, really. One was that it had always been a bit of a joke that I could play a mini Miriam Margolyes with our 40 years apart parallel lives and hair. And so I wanted to develop something for the two of us, and I talked to Miriam about it and she was up for that. And then my dad died sort of early on in the process of thinking about things with Miriam, and he died very quickly. He had cancer and it was 3 months from start to finish. We didn't have the best relationship and we didn't get to reconcile and have those big chats, and as many writers do, I decided to put that into a project and explore those feelings that way, and thus Bucket.
So what was your first experience of being filmed for television like with Bucket, and how was that different to things that you've done before as well?
Right, yeah, so Bucket, it wasn't the first thing I've ever done that's been filmed. Like, I've done little online sketches and things like that I have written as well, and I've been in a lot of telly, so I didn't have any performance nerves, but the big difference was it does feel like your baby and your heart and your stomach are out there, and it's brilliantly exciting when you walk into a set that you've written and you've created and it's brought to life, and at the same time you hear your words out of somebody else's mouth and go, oh, that isn't how I imagined it, or oh my gosh, that's brilliant, so it's the agony and the ecstasy of anything creative. It was brilliant and it was terrifying every single day.
Have you always wanted to write comedy, or is it just the art of writing that intrigues you?
No, I've always done comedy, always, and I've always found taking the mickey out of everything came very naturally. So when I was really young, I would always do joke skits on teachers, and joke plays and things. I was never particularly maybe I was quite intense, but I wasn't too serious. I always found it more fun to muck about, and I have always done that, though I think in some ways thrillers, because I've written a thriller, and the tension and the rhythm of that is very much like comedy. It's about the timing and layers to characters that get discovered. But people have always laughed at me, which I rightly or wrongly took to assume that maybe I should do some comedy.
And when we spoke for the BBC Writersroom blog a few months back, you said that you really took a long time to get to know your characters that you wrote. Have you got any tips for people to get into their own characters and really understand how to know them?
Well, I think there are lots of things you can read in books and online advice, and a lot of them will say go for a walk with those characters or put yourself in their shoes and try and understand them, and all of that is true. When it comes to being practical, I have one thing that I certainly did, which is I probably did so many drafts of the very first story, and I had scenes and storylines which never made it to screen and never even made it to show the channel because they were in early drafts. But I took my characters out on the page and I had them say way too much. I overwrote loads of things, and in a project I'm writing right now, I panic going, I'm not going to use any of this material, and you want to be efficient and you want to move the scene on, and actually take the time in development to write those scenes that will never get used like playing scales on a piano. It's practicing the voice, and you'll get to know what they think. And sometimes you might find the characters start, in my case, always they start arguing. And then I would find, it almost came to them that there were secrets that they would start arguing about. You throw something in. Oh, you did this when I was 12. I don't know, I'm making up as I go along, I'm improvising. But then that creates a backstory for the character, and even if that's never seen, finally, you know that it's there, and that helps when you're talking about superficial things. There's a tone to the character, I think. There's a tone to that voice because they're resentful about something that happened 15 years ago.
And do you give people accents before you even sort of write them down? Do you know what they sound like in your head?
Well, in Bucket, I knew who I was writing for with Miriam, so that was easy, and I was playing on the versions of herself that she presents in different situations, because obviously I saw her in different modes to when she's on Graham Norton and things like that. So I had different registers to play with. But with the other characters, I didn't know who was going to play them, and their voices, I had definite ideas about, but it's like a dream, you know, it's not actually somebody, it's a version of a human that seems to be fully formed. And I didn't give them accents, but this is interesting. Stephanie Beecham, who played Auntie Pat, she sort of said, "You write Northern." I said, "Well, I guess I am, so yeah." And she said, I had to go through the rhythm of the speech in a Northern accent, and then I knew exactly who the person was, and then I just made, you know, then she did her own voice. I thought, I certainly didn't intend to do that, but I guess it came out. Good. I mean, that's my voice then, isn't it? I didn't intend it to be. Yeah. Sometimes you can specify accents, and sometimes it'll all come together when the right actor walks into the room, and at the audition you go, "Oh, that sounds great."
Now, obviously, we've got an opportunity with BBC Comedy and BBC Writers Room, the Caroline Aherne bursary, and last year we lost, you know, Caroline, Victoria Wood, Carla Lane. What do you think their legacy is, and is there anything sort of distinctly northern about that, as you sort of mentioned?
I think so, with both Caroline Aherne and Victoria Wood. I was and remain a huge fan of them both, and for two reasons. One, I think they're brilliant and I could never match them, and I like that. It's quite good to just have a thing that you admire. And two, they're part of my joy. I used to watch them from when I was too young to even quite understand why it was a joke, but I knew that it was, and I recognised the rhythm. I think there definitely is a northern sense of humour, absolutely, and I think there's probably several different types, and I think they played with characters, and they played with pathos so much, both of them, that gave us, I think that's why they're so affecting, all the shows that they did. And I tell you this, I read recently, Victoria Wood did a series called Mensana and Thingamydoodah, gonna say early 90s, and it was 6 different stories and she was in them all. And she later had said, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have been in them all, and I didn't really think they were that good, and I didn't do that again, and it wasn't that great." And I just thought, I loved them, and I bought the scripts and read them, and I was obsessed. And sometimes you don't feel your own work is exactly as you might want it to be, but people will love it. And I just thought, gosh, if even she didn't think that those things were brilliant, but they were brilliant. Just how, I don't know, it just meant a lot to me to hear that she doubted herself, and yet I loved it. And I think as a writer, you will doubt yourself, and people will chime in and say, "Don't like that, that's funny." Somebody will love it, and it's a wonderful thing to make people laugh or affect people in that way. And I think both of those two women definitely did. And I think it's because they picked underdogs, and they picked complicated people, and they never apologised for those choices. Or maybe, I don't know, felt like they didn't try to please an audience. They just said what the people they met.
So on that note, do you think that, you know, something to take away is that you really have to be true to yourself, and if you find a voice, or, you know, if something inspires you, then, you know.
Yeah, I think never try and copy, but if you like Victoria Wood or those sorts of characters and that makes you laugh, then you can certainly go and play around in the park of those characters and those voices. But to try and match something or to write in the style of somebody else, you're bound to just be a rubbish version. So I've never tried to be like anybody else. Consciously, subconsciously I'm sure I have. And yeah, it takes time to find out what works, but that's okay.
Now, do you have any tips for creating a memorable character yourself?
I think being really strong as opposed to bland is always going to be a great starting point. When characters are functional in a scene, the straight guy, the straight woman who are basically just giving feeder lines, they're really boring. And a tip that I've definitely tried, who knows how successful I've been in scenes, is every person in that scene is the main character in the scene. Go back over the scene and make sure that every character has their own secret world and is thinking, and you're writing it from their point of view. And the ones that are good will be the ones that you keep. I've certainly written something where I realised at the end I had to just get rid of a whole character because they didn't do anything. And it was sort of heartbreaking to think I was now going to have to rewrite the whole thing. But it meant that that character they weren't a character, they weren't doing anything. So be bold in their choices. And I think the good ones stand out, but you might not be the person to see that. Yeah. Somebody else might tell you.
And do you ever have anything in mind when you're creating a character, you know, how they might be filmed or how they might be on screen, or do you just kind of push that aside and just think, no, this is what I want to write?
Oh, I see. I think both of those things. I always have a very, very clear image of what this is going to be like, and I always write with music, and I have a soundtrack, and I create these sort of feelings in myself of the scene, and sometimes listening to a song will give me an idea, and I try and get that feeling on the page, and to me it's very, very clear. And I think you can write quite definite stage directions to shape a scene, because I think if you don't, then it might not be clear to the reader how it's going to be. It's fine to say then we track up to, or you know, this person sighs into their teacup if it's relevant to the emotion of the scene. You should never add stage directions that have no dramatic purpose character-wise, but if they do, then do. And I think about it very, very clearly, but it'll never be filmed the way I imagined it. I think that's the way it is.
Now, on a slightly different note, what are your thoughts on the representation of women in comedy at the moment?
Well, I think it could be better. I mean, I think this is a big topic in the world, and with regards to, and it's crazy, we talk about it being diversity, and you sort of go, minority, or this, that, and the other, and you just go, herein lies the problem. There are absolutely, it is a fact that there are fewer women on screen than there should be, and in the world around us. And I think speaking parts, it's something ridiculous, and I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head now, but it's rubbish. You know, something like only 30% of parts on telly are women who have more than one line, or whatever it is. And so often women don't even have a name. It's not time to go into this now because loads of people do it brilliantly, sending out casting breakdowns about how appalling it is. Now, within comedy, there are loads of women doing it, and there are plenty of women doing stand-up and women doing writing and so on and so forth. But they always get targeted when it comes to TV as woman in comedy, on panel shows or as a writer, or the woman in a show. And if you actually look at representation, if you have a show with all women in it or 5 women in it, people go, well, as they did with Bucket, somebody said it's 20 minutes before a man speaks. Oh. I've never heard it the other way round, as something unusual where it's an all-male cast, or typically in a 6-person show 4 men, 2 women wouldn't be considered as unusual, but the other way around would be. And I think that is changing, and I think it will change, because when you don't have enough women in a show, then they become woman. And all of a sudden they have to, people will get upset because they go, oh, they've got a woman who's like this, and not all women are like this. And if you have several women in a show, then you can have somebody who isn't defined by being a woman, but they're defined, if you take Friends as an example, then you've got the uptight one, the wacky one, the spoiled one, and it's not just the female one.
Because one of the things that we were speaking about before is, you know, flawed women, and the fact that we need more flawed women characters in TV in general, and especially, you know, in comedy. Do you think that women are maybe put off writing comedy at all? And, you know, do you think that that might be a thing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a truth or a belief that the idea of comedy is hard, and I think that it can be brutal. So if you take the stand-up as an introduction into comedy, there are very a few examples of it being a lovely, gentle experience. If people aren't laughing, then it feels like they failed. I think sometimes people or women may feel, and I can't speak for them, that they're going to be judged on more than their jokes. And I think that I've heard it in castings about whether somebody's going to be sexy, and, well, if they're this, then are we going to be thinking, oh, that they're not, or that they're dippy because they're blonde, and things like this. And I think that may put some people off. And at the same time, I think that might be why women can get into writing, because if they're not performers, then you can create lots of different characters and be all of them, and you can experience them. But I think the media as it is, women are so judged. There's no point pretending they're not. And, you know, if you're not... Well, having never been the sexy one, I quickly thought I'd better develop a personality and make jokes. But I can, you know, I can understand that people don't want to go there.
On that note, is there a character that you have in mind, you know, that you would really love to write? I don't think I think particularly about whether my characters are going to be like a type that I want to say. I really enjoy writing complicated women and angry women, because there's definitely been a thing in shows where women know best and sort of tell off, or they're put upon, or they are overly sexual without that being complicated, which I know in Bucket, Mim is very outspoken and she's very sort of confident, and it's all a bit too much. And I think that once you get further into the story, you realise that this is a lot of her trying to be outrageous and to compensate and to shock her daughter, because she can't talk about intimacy in any other way because it's too painful. And I really am enjoying exploring that. And the thing I'm writing at the moment does have a lot of women in, because it's sort of based on people I worked with. The fact that they're female isn't that relevant, other than it's often a problem for them based on how other people see them. But it's all about those complicated feelings, which I think is important, that women, we're all human, we all just feel like humans in the world, but how you're seen can be a real shock when people judge you in a way that you didn't think you would ever be judged. Now, just a quick one before we have to wrap up. Do you have any top tips, or one top tip that you can leave us with for writing a comedy character? Maybe something that we haven't thought of. I'll put you on the spot now.
Oh, good. I want for high character comedy. Well, do you know what? If I had the absolute answer, I'd be doing it all day, every day, and wouldn't be sort of crying over my laptop when things go wrong. I think a real top tip is that character has to be real. Now, that doesn't mean it's ever seen on TV before, but it has to be somebody that you could imagine meeting. A lot of people think, well, I've never met somebody like this, but if you have, then block out that chat and tell that story. And my main top tip is get to the end. Whatever you're writing, get to the end. Even if you think it's rubbish, get to the end of that story, because by forcing yourself, the character will talk back to you.
Thank you for sending all your questions. So we've got quite a lot who've come through. We've got one for Paul Anthony, I hope I'm saying that right. Do you make yourself laugh, Frog?
Sometimes. I don't think I ever have laughed out loud at anything I've written, but I certainly have. No, maybe I haven't. When you're corpsing and you're performing, it's normally to do with somebody else making me laugh. So no, actually, no, I don't.
One from Emily Jane Clark. Did you write more than one pilot episode before sending Bucket out to producers?
Well, in this case, I've written quite a few things, unproduced scripts beforehand, and some other stuff that had been sketches and shorter stuff and radio things. So Bucket was already with a production team from its conception, and we went to a channel and worked from that way. So I always knew what the story of the pilot was going to be, and I always knew what the arc of the series, more or less, was going to be. But so I did different drafts of the pilot, which had different stories in, but I didn't do, lots of different. I was always with a producer.
What do you think you need before you sort of try to, pitch or explain, a comedy to someone? Do you think you need a first script, or is an idea enough? Or
I think it all depends on who you are, who they are, and what it is you're pitching. Because a fully realised script is always going to be the clearest way of saying this is what I'm trying to do. But a really brilliant idea in a treatment, maybe that you can explain that, casting like this sort of person might help bring it to life, and somebody might go, well, let's do some sample scenes, or if you've got something else, okay, you can write, let's see where we go. But I think to approach a producer or production company, you need to have either a fantastically original idea, of which, to be honest, is there such a thing, or a very clear product, which is your voice and your idea.
One from Kieran Grimes here. Did any of the cast of Bucket have much input into their characters' voices?
No, they were not allowed. It was entirely up to me. No, not true. Well, it was all pretty written, and I think the thing that's quite important about Bucket was that on any British comedy show, it's a low budget, because it's on BBC4, and thus the time scale you have is very tight. You don't have a long development rehearsal process. And it's your job as a writer to make it fairly obvious what you want it to be. But yes, obviously, people who at the read-through would say, well, I think this and I think that, or I'd like more lines, please. So, yes, and we shaped it, but that's all.
One from Craig Seasider Smith. What is your process of idea to script?
It's quite long and quite painful, from idea to script, because there's something that exists in your head that you can't quite get down in words for a long time. So, something I've learned when I've been writing on other shows, like the CBBC shows I've done, is you write out a story, you write out in bullet points, you then develop them. You force yourself to make the bullet points connect, join the dots, before you get to writing the script. Because previously, when I've written off the top of my head, you get lost halfway through.
Now, I know that you've also, on a different note, you've done some stuff for USA.
Yeah.
Is there a different process to writing in the UK as to a USA market?
Well, so, two things I've been doing. I was working on a film, an American film, where I had this job as being on-set writer, which doesn't really exist in the UK, and it was wonderful because the script is an adaptation of a book, and a script had been written by some writers, and this is the case in America much more. Then somebody else does it, and the producers then get someone else to do a polish, blah, blah, blah. And then I was brought on as the on-set writer, and my job specifically was to, initially I should say, to be coming up with extra jokes. It wasn't a sort of knockabout comedy, but there were lots of comedy lines where they felt they could have some alts and push it a bit further. And one day I did 80 one-liners, and we were just knocking them into the scenes, and on film you can do that. It was a fantastically collaborative experience, because I was working with the director and the actual writer and the producers and the actors, And we were adding things and throwing things around, and I was able to make a bit of a pass on the script and do some British tweaks because some of the characters were British and obviously American had written it, and I was able to work with the writer and be, in this case, be her ally and be a bit like a script editor for her, just to bounce some ideas around. And Bucket has sold to Australia, which is exciting, but it's also talks about a US format, and I went over there and pitched some other ideas, and I had loads of meetings, and it was brilliant, and I shall be talking to America tonight on Skype about some things. It's so different over there. The writer, and the creator I should say, is hugely important, whether they're famous or not famous. If this is their baby, you know, they're a very, very important figure. There will always be loads of other writers. In sitcom, they might be making 22 episodes. They will have a room of writers, they will have a showrunner, they will have on-set writers who are there just going, okay, let's do that again. Okay, listening, it's not really working, what's the problem with the scene? I know, let's do this, tweak, 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 on the set. They will have people who are simply joke writers in a room, locked away, who might graduate further up. The reason they do that is because it's a huge business and they've got loads of money. I think equally it can be quite brutal. There will always be network people who will be giving you loads of notes, and if it's your baby, you don't necessarily get to be an auteur in the way in the UK you do. You know, you can have your voice and you'll be given that on your own. And it can be difficult having other people chiming in on your baby. In America, you're paid handsomely, so I think you can suck it up. But you're very important, you're at the centre of things, and the writer is always part of that creative process, if not, you're not, it seems to me it's not like you're God or anything, but they certainly are more important than sometimes in other places.
How was writing 80 lines a day?
It was great.
Yeah?
It was
Your
a
mind
good
a bit
day.
frazzled by the end of it.
Well, it's because I think part of it, and this is why it worked, this wasn't my show, that I hadn't laboured over this and felt misunderstood if somebody didn't get a line. So I was just coming up with 80 different jokes, and I know that, 40, 50 of them probably wouldn't be very good, but that's how many it took to get some that everybody went, oh, that's funny. And you know what, when Rose Byrne goes, ha, that's hilarious, you feel great.
So, another one from Craig here. What inspires you? Craig, very, very popular Craig. What inspires you for your comedy dialogue?
I think it's voices I've heard. I would throw back that northern thing, the way in which people talk can often be very funny. That's how I grew up. I don't have a strong accent now. I never did. I'm in no way posh. I have to sort of throw this out there. It just has changed because I've been living in London so long. But definitely people, and I can remember teachers' voices, and I can remember friends' voices, and I can remember somebody I worked with when I was a cleaner's voices, and I can, I remember a woman taking me round Edinburgh University once on an open day when I was 16. She has stayed in my mind, and she does sometimes pop up in things I've written. So my inspiration is just people that I meet, definitely.
Great. We're out of questions.
Okay. Oh, Craig, send
Craig,
me some
send
more.
no more. Thank you so much, Frog.
Pleasure.